a millionaire catches his maid caring for his Alzheimer's-stricken mother with pure devotion. What should have been a job reveals a bond deeper than family. His fiancée, ashamed of the illness, humiliates the old woman in front of guests. But he sees everything, and what he does next shocks everyone. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise that this will be the best story you will hear in your life. The luxury estate of Alexander Blackwood stood as a testament to power and prestige in the hills of Connecticut. Sprawling gardens, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers reflected the success of a man who had built an empire from nothing. But beneath the polished surfaces and perfect symmetry, invisible fractures were spreading through the mansion's very foundation. Alexander, at 55, commanded respect in every boardroom across the country. His firm jawline and penetrating gaze had graced the covers of business magazines, and his name was synonymous with strategic brilliance. He had created a world of control and predictability until the daytime began to erase with cruel gentleness the lucidity of the woman who had given him life. Eleanor Blackwood had once been the backbone of this family. Her keen mind had guided Alexander through childhood and into his first business ventures. Now at 82, she wandered through corridors she had once commanded, mixing memories with fantasies, her once sharp eyes now softened with confusion. Some days she recognized her son, other days he was a stranger in her home. The elegant woman who had hosted presidents was now fragile, her brilliant mind dismantling itself piece by precious piece. "Alexander, is that you or your father?" Eleanor asked, her voice quavering as she sat in the sunroom surrounded by photographs she no longer recognized. Alexander paused in the doorway, his designer suit immaculate, his briefcase in hand. The question hit him like a physical blow, as it did every time. "It's me, Mother, Alexander, your son." "Oh, of course," she smiled, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "You look so much like him sometimes." His father had been gone for 15 years. Alexander glanced at his watch. A board meeting in an hour. He approached, kissed her forehead, and straightened. "I'll be back for dinner. Sarah is here with you today." At the mention of Sarah, Eleanor's face brightened genuinely. "Sarah, yes. She promised to help me with my hair today." Sarah Morgan had been Eleanor's caregiver for the past year, ever since the diagnosis had become impossible to ignore. She wasn't family, but she moved through the spaces of the house as though she belonged, arranging Eleanor's silver hair with gentle hands, holding her through night terrors, and transforming chaos into tenderness with an unwavering patience that amazed Alexander. As if summoned by her name, Sarah appeared in the doorway carrying a tray with tea. In her mid-40s, she wasn't conventionally beautiful, but her presence carried a quiet strength. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform was pristine but unremarkable. What set her apart were her eyes, steady, kind, and somehow knowing. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," she said, placing the tray beside Eleanor. "I've made Mrs. Blackwood's favorite Earl Grey." "Thank you, Sarah." Alexander nodded formally, though something in her steadfast manner always made him pause. "I have meetings all day. Vanessa will be coming by later to discuss wedding arrangements." At the mention of Vanessa, a shadow crossed Sarah's face, so brief Alexander almost missed it. But she recovered instantly. "Of course, sir. We'll be fine here." As Alexander left the estate in his sleek black Mercedes, the contrast between the two women in his mother's life couldn't have been more pronounced. Sarah, with her simple ways and constant attention, and Vanessa Huntington Pierce, his fiancée, with her polished sophistication and society connections. Vanessa arrived at the mansion at precisely noon, her designer heels clicking purposefully across the marble foyer. At 43, she was the epitome of cultivated elegance, a renowned art dealer whose gallery was the talk of the East Coast. Her chestnut hair fell in perfect waves, and her smile had graced charity galas across 3 states. To the world, she was the perfect match for Alexander Blackwood. "Darling," she called, air-kissing his assistant who had let her in. "Where is everyone? I thought we were reviewing the guest list today." "Mr. Blackwood is still at his meeting," the assistant explained. "He should return by 3. Mrs. Blackwood is in the sunroom with Sarah." Vanessa's smile tightened imperceptibly. "I see. Well, I'll just say hello before I set up in the study." The sunroom was filled with light, illuminating Eleanor as she hummed a distant melody. Sarah sat beside her, helping her look through an old photo album. "Oh, look who's here," Sarah said warmly as Vanessa appeared. "Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Huntington Pierce has come to visit." Eleanor looked up, confusion crossing her features. "Pierce? Are you related to the Pierces from Boston? I knew a Pierce family in the 60s. Vanessa's smile remained fixed, though it didn't reach her eyes. "No, Eleanor. I'm Vanessa, Alexander's fiancée. We're getting married in 3 months, remember?" Eleanor stared blankly, then turned back to Sarah. "Who is getting married?" Sarah gently placed her hand over Eleanor's. "Your son, Alexander, is marrying Vanessa." "Alexander is much too young to marry," Eleanor stated with sudden conviction. "He's only just started college." Vanessa's posture stiffened. Sarah noticed the familiar signs, the tightening around Vanessa's mouth, the slight flare of her nostrils that preceded impatience. "Perhaps we could have some fresh tea," Sarah suggested smoothly, standing. "Mrs. Blackwood was just telling me about her trip to Paris in 1965. It sounds like it was wonderful." "I don't have time for tea or ancient history," Vanessa said, her voice sharper than intended. She caught herself, softening her tone artificially. "I mean, I have so much wedding planning to do. Eleanor, I hope you'll feel well enough to help with some of the decisions soon." Eleanor looked at her with sudden clarity. "You know, young lady, I don't believe we've met before. Are you one of Alexander's friends from school?" Vanessa's smile disappeared completely. She turned to Sarah, lowering her voice. "This is getting worse. The wedding is in 3 months. What will people think if she can't even remember who I am during the ceremony?" Sarah's expression remained neutral, though her eyes hardened slightly. "Alzheimer's isn't concerned with social calendars. Miss Huntington Pierce, Mrs. Blackwood has good days and difficult ones." "Well, make sure she has a good day on June 15th, Vanessa replied, turning on her heel. "I'll be in the study. When Alexander returns, tell him we need to discuss options." After Vanessa left, Eleanor looked up at Sarah with surprising lucidity. "She doesn't like me very much, does she?" Sarah sat back down, taking Eleanor's hand. "She's just busy with the wedding plans." "No," Eleanor said, her voice momentarily strong. "I may forget names and faces, but I still know when someone wishes I wasn't here." She paused, looking around the sunroom as if seeing it for the first time. "This is still my house, isn't it?" "Yes, Mrs. Blackwood," Sarah assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "This will always be your house." When Alexander returned home that evening, the mansion was quiet. He found Vanessa in his study, surrounded by seating charts and sample invitations. "There you are," she said, rising to kiss him. "We need to talk about your mother." Alexander loosened his tie. "What about her?" "She didn't recognize me again today." "Alexander, I'm worried about how this will look at the wedding. Perhaps we should consider moving her to that facility in Vermont. Just temporarily. The doctor said it might be good for her to have specialized care." Alexander frowned. "She's comfortable here. This is her home." "But it's becoming our home too," Vanessa reasoned, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "And the staff is getting uncomfortable. Even Sarah mentioned today how difficult things are becoming." "Sarah said that?" Alexander asked, surprised. "Well, not in those exact words," Vanessa amended smoothly. "But it was implied. Darling, I'm just thinking of what's best for everyone." Later that night, as Alexander walked the hallways of his childhood home, he paused outside his mother's door. He heard gentle voices inside, Sarah reading aloud from what sounded like a classic novel. His mother's laughter, brief but genuine, filtered through the door. Something about the sound made him hesitate. When was the last time he'd heard his mother laugh? He couldn't remember. And when had he last sat with her? Not just for a perfunctory visit, but to truly be present. He continued to his own room, but sleep evaded him. In the silence of the night, he began to wonder what else he might have missed while building his empire of steel and glass. Morning light filtered through the curtains as Alexander sat alone at the breakfast table, a newspaper untouched beside his coffee. His sleepless night had left him with more questions than answers. For months he had been so consumed with mergers and acquisitions that he had delegated his mother's care entirely to others. Now, hearing her laughter had awakened something dormant within him, a curiosity about what truly happened in his home when he wasn't present. "Would you like more coffee, Mr. Blackwood?" Sarah asked, appearing with a fresh pot. Alexander studied her for a moment. In her simple uniform, she seemed almost invisible, a feature of the household rather than a person. Yet there was a quiet dignity in her posture that he had never truly noticed before. "Sarah, how long have you been working here now?" he asked. 14 months, sir," she replied, refilling his cup. "And before that?" A flicker of something, hesitation perhaps, crossed her face. "I worked at Meadowbrook Retirement Home for nearly 20 years. "That's a long time in one profession," Alexander noted. "What made you leave?" Sarah's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "I believe in dignity, Mr. Blackwood. Towards the end of my time there, the facility changed management. New policies were implemented that weren't in the best interest of the residents." Her eyes met his directly. "Your mother deserves better than what was happening there." The simple statement carried weight. Alexander nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty." Throughout the day, Alexander found himself working from home, an unusual choice that surprised his assistant. He moved his laptop between rooms, always within earshot of his mother. From his father's old study, he could hear Sarah and Eleanor in the garden room, their voices drifting through the open door. "Now, Mrs. Blackwood, would you like to help me arrange these flowers?" "She always had such a good eye for color," Sarah was saying. "Did I?" Eleanor sounded pleased. "I don't remember much about flowers anymore." "That's all right. Your hands remember. See how nicely you placed that rose." Alexander moved closer to the doorway, watching unobserved. Sarah sat beside his mother at a table covered with fresh-cut flowers from the garden. With infinite patience, she guided Eleanor's trembling hands, celebrating each bloom his mother managed to place in the vase. "Sarah, were you at my wedding?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "No, Mrs. Blackwood, I wasn't." "That's strange. I feel like I've known you forever." Eleanor paused, her forehead creasing. "You remind me of someone. Perhaps I just have one of those familiar faces," Sarah suggested gently. "No, it's more than that." Eleanor's eyes suddenly sharpened with unexpected clarity. "You have kind eyes. Like someone who once helped me through a difficult time." Sarah's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "These pink peonies would look lovely near the center, don't you think?" Alexander retreated silently, puzzled by the exchange. His mother had always been an excellent judge of character. Even now, with her mind failing, something about Sarah resonated with her. Later that afternoon, Vanessa arrived with wedding samples and a whirlwind of energy that seemed to darken the peaceful atmosphere that had settled over the house. "Alexander, darling, I wasn't expecting you home," she said, kissing him distractedly while checking her phone. "I'm meeting with the caterers later, but I wanted to show you the final table settings." "Where's my mother?" Alexander asked. Vanessa waved dismissively. Sarah took her upstairs for a nap. Apparently flower arranging was too taxing. "Honestly, Alexander, I'm concerned about the wedding. Dr. Michaels mentioned a new medication that might help keep her more present. For appearances, you understand." "Appearances?" Alexander repeated, the word suddenly striking him as hollow. "Yes, of course. The Thompsons, the Hendersons, the governor, they'll all be there. We can't have her wandering around calling people by the wrong names." Alexander felt something cold settle in his stomach. "She's not a problem to be managed, Vanessa. She's my mother." Vanessa's expression softened into practiced sympathy. "Of course she is, darling. I'm just thinking of what's best for everyone." She placed a hand on his arm. "The Alzheimer'S Association Gala is tonight. I thought we'd make an appearance, show our support. It would be good publicity, especially with your mother's condition. People admire that kind of family solidarity." The suggestion struck Alexander as strangely calculated. "You want to use my mother's illness for public relations?" "Don't be dramatic," Vanessa laughed lightly. "I'm simply suggesting we make the best of a difficult situation. That's what your mother would want. She was always so practical about public image." That evening, Alexander found himself standing at his mother's bedroom door again. Sarah sat beside the bed, reading aloud from Jane Austen. Eleanor was propped up against pillows, her eyes closed but a small smile playing on her lips. "She always loved Pride and Prejudice," Alexander said softly from the doorway. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Yes, she mentions it often. Sometimes she thinks she's Elizabeth Bennet. When I was a boy, She would read it to me, doing all the voices. Alexander entered the room and sat in a chair across from Sarah. I complained terribly, wanted adventure stories instead, but I remember every word she read. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. Alexander, is that you or your father? The familiar question no longer stung as it once had. It's me, Mother Alexander. You should be studying for your exam tomorrow, she murmured. All done, he assured her, taking her hand. I wanted to hear the story. A look of understanding passed between Alexander and Sarah, a silent agreement to step into Eleanor's reality rather than drag her painfully back to their own. Sarah continued reading, her voice gentle and expressive. Alexander remained, watching his mother's face relax into peaceful enjoyment. When Eleanor finally drifted to sleep, Sarah carefully marked the page and closed the book. You're very good with her, Alexander observed as they stepped into the hallway. She makes it easy, Sarah replied. On her most confused days, there's still so much wisdom in her. Vanessa thinks we should consider a care facility. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but Alexander noticed her hands tightening slightly on the book. That's a personal family decision, Mr. Blackwood. But you have an opinion, he pressed. I believe Mrs. Blackwood is most comfortable in familiar surroundings, Sarah said carefully. Change can be very disorienting for someone with Alzheimer's. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. The Alzheimer's Association Gala is tonight. Vanessa thinks we should attend. Will you? I'm not sure, he admitted. It feels performative. Sarah considered her words carefully. Mr. Blackwood, in my experience, there are those who want to be seen doing good things, and those who simply do them without an audience. The observation lingered with Alexander as he returned to his room to dress for the evening. When his phone rang, Vanessa's name flashing on the screen, he let it go to voicemail. Instead, he made his way to his father's old study and unlocked a drawer he hadn't opened in years. Inside lay journals, dozens of them, his mother's elegant handwriting filling pages with observations about life, family, and her many charitable endeavors. Alexander selected one from 20 years prior and began to read. 3 hours later, he was surrounded by open journals, pieces of his mother's life spread before him like a map. What he discovered left him breathless. Eleanor Blackwood, society matron and corporate wife, had secretly founded and funded a scholarship program for nursing students from disadvantaged backgrounds. For decades, she had maintained this program without public recognition, changing hundreds of lives with no fanfare or publicity. A particular entry caught his attention. Met with SM today. Such promise in this young woman. Her determination despite her circumstances is remarkable. Arranged for the full scholarship. William doesn't understand why I'm so invested in this particular student, but some connections transcend explanation. Her eyes remind me of someone I once knew, someone who showed me kindness when I had nothing. Alexander checked the date, 23 years ago. The initials SM nagged at him. Something about them seemed significant, but he couldn't place why. He was still pondering this when he heard a crash from downstairs, followed by his mother's distressed voice echoing through the halls. He rushed toward the sound, heart pounding, unprepared for the scene that awaited him in the main salon. Alexander rushed down the grand staircase, following the sound of raised voices. In the salon he found a scene of barely contained chaos. His mother stood in the center of the room in her nightgown, surrounded by broken crystal, the remains of a vase that had stood on the mantel for decades. Vanessa, dressed elegantly for the gala, was speaking in a tight, controlled voice that barely masked her frustration. Eleanor, please. The car is waiting. Alexander and I need to leave for the charity event. You need to go back upstairs with Sarah now. Eleanor's eyes were wide with confusion and distress. I don't know you. Where's William? He promised to take me dancing tonight. William has been gone for 15 years, Vanessa said, her patience clearly stretched thin. I'm Vanessa, your son's fiancée, and you're having one of your episodes again. Don't speak to her that way, Sarah said firmly, entering from the kitchen with a small tray. She set it down and immediately went to Eleanor, carefully guiding her away from the broken glass. Mrs. Blackwood, I made your favorite chamomile tea. Would you like to have it in the library? It's quiet there. Eleanor looked at Sarah with relief, clinging to her arm. Yes, please. This woman is very angry with me and I don't know why. I'm not angry, Vanessa said through clenched teeth. I'm trying to maintain some semblance of order in this house. She turned to Alexander, who had been watching, silently from the doorway. There you are. We're going to be late. The governor specifically asked if we'd be attending. Alexander looked between the three women, his confused mother, his impatient fiancée, and Sarah, who was quietly cleaning up the broken crystal while still supporting Eleanor. You go ahead, he said to Vanessa. I'm staying home tonight. Vanessa's perfect composure slipped. Alexander, this gala is important. People are expecting you to make a statement about your commitment to Alzheimer's research. And that statement would be more meaningful if I actually spent time with someone who has Alzheimer's, don't you think? He replied evenly. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. This isn't like you. You've never missed a networking opportunity. Perhaps it's exactly like me, Alexander said quietly. The real me. Something in his tone made Vanessa pause. She studied him for a moment, then smoothed her designer dress. Fine. I'll explain you had a family emergency, which isn't entirely untrue. She cast a meaningful glance at Eleanor, who was now being gently led toward the library by Sarah. We'll talk about this tomorrow. After Vanessa departed in a cloud of expensive perfume, Alexander found himself following his mother and Sarah to the library. The room, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and worn leather chairs, had always been his father's domain. Now it felt like a sanctuary. Sarah had settled Eleanor in the large armchair by the fireplace and was carefully wrapping a soft blanket around her shoulders. The simple act of tenderness struck Alexander deeply. I'm sorry about the vase, Eleanor said, looking up as Alexander entered. I thought I saw William's reflection in it, but when I reached out, everything fell apart. It's just a vase, Mother, Alexander assured her, taking a seat opposite her. It can be replaced. Sarah offered Eleanor the tea, making sure her hands were steady enough to hold the cup. Mrs. Blackwood was telling me earlier about a dance you both attended when you were young, at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Eleanor's face brightened. Oh, yes. Alexander was just 12, but so handsome in his little suit. William was receiving an award. The ballroom had thousands of lights like stars brought down from heaven. Alexander smiled, remembering. You wore a blue dress. Midnight blue with silver beading. You remember. Eleanor looked delighted. You danced with me. William was busy with business associates, but you stepped right up and said, May I have this dance, Mother? You taught me all my dance steps, Alexander said softly. You were always such a good boy, Eleanor murmured, her eyes growing heavy. Always taking care of everyone. As Eleanor drifted to sleep in the chair, Sarah gently removed the teacup from her loosening grip. Alexander watched, struck by the natural ease between the two women. The initials SM, he said suddenly. They stand for Sarah Morgan, don't they? Sarah froze, her back to him as she placed the cup on the tray. When she turned, her expression was guarded. Yes, those are my initials. You weren't randomly assigned to my mother through the care agency, were you? Alexander pressed. You specifically requested this position. Sarah seemed to consider her words carefully. Your mother changed my life, Mr. Blackwood. Many years ago, when I had nothing, when I was working 3 jobs just to survive, she gave me an opportunity that no one else would. The nursing scholarship, Alexander said, the pieces finally connecting. You were the student she mentioned in her journal. Sarah nodded, her composure finally cracking slightly. I didn't know it was her at first. The foundation used a different name, but she took a personal interest in my progress. Invited me to tea several times. It wasn't until years later that I discovered she was the actual founder and benefactor. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? Sarah asked quietly. When the agency called about a position with Eleanor Blackwood, I knew immediately I wanted to apply. It felt like coming full circle, a chance to repay a debt that could never truly be repaid. Alexander leaned forward. So your dedication to my mother, it's out of obligation? No, Sarah said firmly, her eyes meeting his. It began as gratitude, yes. But Mrs. Blackwood isn't just a former benefactor to me now. She's... Sarah paused, searching for the right words. She's the closest thing to family I've ever had. The admission hung in the air between them. Alexander felt something shift in his understanding of both women. And who were you to her, he asked. In her journal she wrote that you reminded her of someone. Sarah's expression softened. She never told me directly, but once when she was showing me old photographs, she pointed to a young woman standing beside her. My half-sister, she said. My father's secret daughter from before he married my mother. She found me after our father died, when I was at my lowest point. No one else in the family would acknowledge her existence, but she showed me kindness when I needed it most. I never knew my mother had a half-sister, Alexander said, stunned. According to your mother, they lost touch after your grandmother discovered their friendship and threatened to disinherit her. Your mother always regretted giving in to that pressure. Alexander sat back, absorbing this revelation. And you remind her of this half-sister? Apparently there's some resemblance, Sarah said softly. On her clearer days, she once told me, you have Margaret's eyes, kind eyes that see beyond surfaces. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and closing. Moments later, Vanessa appeared in the doorway of the library, her expression tense. The governor asked about you specifically, she said to Alexander without preamble. I had to make excuses. It was humiliating. Alexander stood. We'll discuss this in the study. My mother is sleeping. Once in the privacy of the study, Vanessa didn't bother hiding her irritation. This isn't like you, Alexander. Since when do you prioritize sitting at home over networking with people who could double your company's value? Since I discovered there are more important things than company valuation, Alexander replied evenly. Vanessa studied him, her head tilted. This is about Sarah, isn't it? Don't think I haven't noticed how much time you've been spending observing her with your mother. What I've been observing is how poorly we've treated my mother, Alexander corrected her. How little attention I've paid to what she truly needs. She needs professional care, Alexander, the kind only a specialized facility can provide. What she needs is dignity and familiar surroundings, he countered, and someone who genuinely cares about her comfort, not just how she appears to others. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting I don't care about Eleanor? I'm stating a fact. You see her as an inconvenience, a potential embarrassment at our wedding. That's not fair, Vanessa protested, though her tone lacked conviction. I'm simply being realistic about her condition and how it affects our lives. Our future. Our future, Alexander repeated slowly. I've been thinking a lot about that lately. A look of alarm crossed Vanessa's features. What exactly does that mean? Before Alexander could respond, a commotion from upstairs interrupted them. Eleanor's voice, unusually loud and distressed, echoed down the hallway. Without hesitation, Alexander rushed toward the sound, Vanessa following reluctantly behind. They found Eleanor in her bedroom. Dressed in an outdated evening gown, she must have pulled from the back of her closet. The once elegant dress hung loosely on her thin frame. She was clutching an old handbag and looking anxiously around the room. I need to be ready, she was saying to Sarah, who stood nearby with a concerned expression. William will be here any minute to take me to the charity ball. I'm receiving an award for the children's hospital wing. Mrs. Blackwood, Sarah said gently, it's very late. Perhaps we could get you comfortable for bed and— No, Eleanor insisted, suddenly agitated. I need to be there. They're counting on me. The children are counting on me. Alexander stepped forward. Mother, it's Alexander. There's no event tonight. Eleanor looked at him with confusion. Alexander? But you're just a boy. Why are you dressed like your father? Vanessa made a sound of exasperation from the doorway. This is exactly what I was talking about. How can we possibly have her at the wedding when she can't distinguish her son from her husband? The comment, spoken too loudly and with obvious frustration, reached Eleanor. She turned toward Vanessa, her expression shifting from confusion to surprising clarity. You, she said, pointing a finger that trembled only slightly. You don't belong in this house. You never have. Vanessa stiffened. Eleanor, you're confused again. I'm Vanessa, your son's fiancée. I may forget names, Eleanor said with sudden strength, but I never forget a person's true nature. And yours is cold. You don't love my son. You love what he represents. The room fell silent. Alexander looked between his mother and his fiancée, seeing the stark truth in his mother's momentary lucidity. That's enough, Vanessa said sharply, stepping forward and gripping Eleanor's arm. You need to lie down and— Don't touch her like that, Sarah intervened, moving quickly between them. Her voice was calm but held an unmistakable warning. Vanessa released Eleanor's arm but turned her frustration toward Sarah. "You're just the help. You don't give orders in this house." "Neither do you," came Alexander's quiet voice from behind them. "Not yet. And now I'm beginning to think not ever." The silence that followed Alexander's words was deafening. Vanessa turned slowly to face him, her perfectly composed features now showing genuine shock. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Alexander stood his ground, feeling more certainty than he had in years. "I said neither do you. This is my mother's home. And as long as she's alive, her comfort and dignity come first. Before business, before social appearances, and certainly before a wedding that I'm no longer sure should happen." Vanessa's expression hardened. "You can't be serious. You're throwing away 3 years of relationship, our entire future, over an old woman who won't even remember this conversation tomorrow." "That old woman is my mother," Alexander said firmly, "and what I'm throwing away are the blinders I've been wearing. Tell me honestly, Vanessa, if my company failed tomorrow, if all my wealth disappeared, would you still want to marry me?" "That's an absurd hypothetical," Vanessa deflected, but her eyes darted away from his. "Is it?" "Because I'm starting to think it's the only question that matters." Eleanor had been watching this exchange with surprising focus. Now she turned to Sarah, who still stood protectively close. "I like him when he stands tall like his father used to," she whispered, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Sarah smiled gently, supporting Eleanor's arm. "Yes, Mrs. Blackwood, so do I." Something in Sarah's quiet affirmation struck Alexander deeply. Here was truth without calculation, care without condition. Vanessa looked between them all, a realization dawning in her eyes. "My God, you're actually choosing them over me." She gave a short, incredulous laugh. "The doddering old woman and the hired help." "I'm choosing authenticity," Alexander corrected her. "Something I've allowed to become far too rare in my life." He took a deep breath. "I think you should go, Vanessa. We both know this isn't going to work." Vanessa stared at him for a long moment, as if waiting for him to retract his words. When he didn't, she straightened her shoulders and removed her engagement ring with deliberate slowness. "You'll regret this," she said, placing the ring on a nearby table with a distinctive click. "When she's gone and you're left with nothing but an empty house and a nurse who only stayed for the paycheck." She turned and walked out, her heels echoing down the hallway like punctuation marks at the end of a finished chapter. After Vanessa's departure, the mansion seemed to exhale. Eleanor, exhausted by the confrontation, allowed Sarah to help her change out of the evening gown and into comfortable nightclothes. Alexander stood by, offering assistance when needed, struck by the natural rhythm the two women had developed, a dance of care choreographed through months of daily intimacy. "Will you read to me?" Eleanor asked Sarah as she settled into bed. "The story about the sisters?" "Of course," Sarah replied, retrieving a worn copy of Little Women from the bedside table. Alexander lingered in the doorway. "May I join you?" Both women looked up, something like surprise on Sarah's face and delight on his mother's. "Alexander used to love this story," Eleanor said confidently, though Alexander had never read the book. "He would always cry when Beth got sick." Rather than correct her, Alexander simply smiled and took a seat in the armchair near the window. "I'm sure I did, Mother." As Sarah read, her voice gentle and expressive, Alexander watched his mother's face relax into peaceful contentment. There was something profound in this simple evening ritual, something he had been too busy to notice or appreciate until now. Later, after Eleanor had drifted to sleep, Alexander and Sarah stepped out into the hallway. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything you do for her." Sarah shook her head slightly. "No thanks needed. As I said, she changed my life. But it's more than repaying a debt now." She hesitated, then added softly, "I've come to love her. When you care for someone through their most vulnerable moments, a bond forms that's hard to explain." "I think I'm beginning to understand that," Alexander replied. "I've missed so much, being caught up in business and social obligations." "It's never too late to be present," Sarah assured him. "The moments of clarity are still there. They're just wrapped differently now." In the days that followed, the mansion underwent a subtle transformation. Alexander began working from home more frequently, rearranging his schedule to be present for meals with his mother. Board meetings were occasionally conducted via video conference from his father's old study, with the door left open so he could hear his mother's voice from nearby rooms. Vanessa's departure didn't go quietly into the night. Society columns buzzed with speculation, and carefully placed rumors questioned Alexander's devotion to his company, his judgment, even his mental state. There were veiled suggestions that he had fallen under the influence of an employee with ulterior motives. His phone rang constantly with concerned calls from business associates and society friends. But within the walls of the mansion, a different reality was taking shape. Alexander discovered the peace that came from simple moments, helping his mother tend to the orchids in the conservatory, even when she called him by his father's name, listening to Sarah read aloud in the evenings, sharing breakfast with both women in the morning sunlight. One evening, about 2 weeks after the broken engagement, Alexander was reviewing contracts in the library when his phone buzzed with a message. It was from his daughter Catherine, his only child from a brief early marriage that had ended in divorce when Catherine was just 5. Now 28 and working as a journalist in California, Catherine had maintained only minimal contact with him over the years, their relationship strained by distance, his workaholic tendencies, and the lingering pain of a broken family. The message was brief. Heard about the engagement. Everything okay? Also, Grandma's condition. Is it getting worse? Alexander stared at the screen, surprised by this rare outreach. He replied carefully, engagement ended by mutual decision. Mother has good days and difficult ones. She would love to see you. What he didn't expect was Catherine's response. Actually, I'm in New York for a story. Could visit this weekend if not intruding. 3 days later, Catherine's taxi pulled up to the mansion. Alexander waited anxiously in the foyer, unsure what to expect from this daughter, who had grown into a woman largely outside his sphere of influence. When she entered, he was struck by how much she resembled her grandmother, the same determined set to her jaw, the same observant eyes. Their greeting was awkward, a hesitant hug that ended too quickly, conversation that stumbled over pleasantries. But when Catherine asked to see her grandmother, something genuine broke through the formality. She may not recognize you, Alexander warned gently as they climbed the stairs. And she might confuse you with your mother or even herself at your age. Catherine nodded. I've been researching Alzheimer's for an article. I understand how it works. They found Eleanor in the sunroom with Sarah, looking through old photo albums. When Eleanor looked up and saw Catherine, something remarkable happened, a flash of perfect recognition. Catherine, she exclaimed, her face lighting up. My beautiful granddaughter. Catherine's composed journalistic demeanor cracked slightly. She approached slowly and knelt beside her grandmother's chair. Hi, Grandma. It's been a long time. Too long, Eleanor agreed, reaching out to touch Catherine's face. But you're here now, and look how lovely you've become. For the next hour, Eleanor remained unusually lucid, asking Catherine about her work, commenting on her resemblance to the Blackwood side of the family, even recalling specific memories from Catherine's childhood visits. Sarah remained nearby, quietly supportive, occasionally helping Eleanor when she struggled to find a word or complete a thought. Catherine watched these interactions with journalistic observation. Later, when Eleanor was resting, Catherine found Alexander in the library. Sarah is remarkable with Grandma, she noted, accepting the cup of tea he offered. Where did you find her? Alexander smiled slightly. I didn't. In a way, Mother found her long ago. He explained Sarah's connection to Eleanor through the scholarship program, watching as his daughter processed this information with the sharp intelligence she'd inherited from both sides of her family. So this woman whose life Grandma changed is now the one preserving Grandma's dignity, Catherine mused. There's poetry in that. Yes, Alexander agreed. There is. And Vanessa couldn't see that poetry, Catherine observed shrewdly. Alexander looked at his daughter with newfound respect for her perception. No, she couldn't. Catherine studied him over the rim of her teacup. Do you know, Dad, I had this whole image of you as the corporate titan who valued nothing but success and appearances. The society pages are having a field day with theories about why you broke your engagement, but none of them have suggested the truth, that you finally chose family over facade. Her words struck him deeply. I was that person for too long, he admitted. It cost me my relationship with you, and nearly cost me these last precious years with my mother." Something softened in Catherine's expression. Maybe it's not too late for us either. Over the next few months, a gentle rhythm established itself in the Blackwood mansion. Catherine began visiting regularly, sometimes staying for weeks at a time as she worked remotely on her articles. Eleanor's condition continued to fluctuate, brilliant clarity one day, profound confusion the next, but she was surrounded by people who valued her presence in whatever form it took. The mansion itself seemed to transform. Rooms that had been preserved like museum exhibits were now lived in. The formal dining room gave way to casual meals in the kitchen. Music, Eleanor had always loved classical piano, filled the previously silent halls. One evening, as summer turned to autumn, Alexander found Sarah alone in the garden, watching the sunset from a stone bench. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She moved over slightly in silent invitation. They sat together comfortably, the silence between them no longer awkward but companionable. "Catherine mentioned she's considering moving back east," Sarah said eventually. "That would be wonderful for your mother and for you." "Yes," Alexander agreed. "I never thought I'd have this second chance with her." He turned slightly to face Sarah, "Just as I never expected to learn so much about compassion and authentic care from watching you with my mother." Sarah smiled, her eyes on the deepening colors of the sunset. "Your mother taught me long ago that true strength isn't found in power or position, but in how we care for one another. I'm just passing on what I learned." "You've become much more than an employee in this house," Alexander said quietly. "You know that, don't you?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "Yes, but professional boundaries are still important. Your mother is still my primary responsibility." "Of course," Alexander nodded. "I would never want to compromise the care she receives." He hesitated, then added, "But when I imagine the future now, whatever it holds, I find I can't picture it without you being part of this family in some way." The words hung between them, neither a declaration nor a question, but an acknowledgement of something that had been growing slowly, rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. Sarah didn't reply immediately. When she did, her voice was soft but steady. "The future will take the shape it's meant to. For now, I'm exactly where I need to be." A call from the house interrupted them, Catherine announcing that dinner was ready and Eleanor was having a particularly good evening. They rose together, walking back toward the warm lights of the mansion. 6 months later, the Blackwood estate hosted a different kind of gathering than the formal charity galas it had once been known for. The occasion was Eleanor's birthday, a simple celebration with no pretense or social networking, just genuine warmth and connection. The guest list was small but meaningful. Catherine, now permanently relocated to a cottage on the estate grounds, a few of Eleanor's oldest friends. Several graduates from her scholarship program who had finally learned the identity of their anonymous benefactor, and the staff who had become like family. In the garden where Eleanor had once hosted elaborate society parties, tables were set up with casual elegance. At the center of it all sat Eleanor herself, sometimes confused about the occasion, but clearly delighted by the surrounding love. "Alexander," she called, recognizing him immediately as he approached with a small cake. "Is it really my birthday?" "It is, Mother," he confirmed, bending to kiss her cheek. 83 years young. Eleanor beamed, then looked around at the gathered faces. Her gaze landed on Sarah, who stood nearby, and Catherine, who sat at her grandmother's side. "I have everything I need right here," Eleanor declared with sudden clarity. "My family. All of my family." Alexander followed her gaze, understanding the truth in her words. Family was no longer defined by blood alone, but by who remained present through the hardest days, who preserved dignity when it was most fragile, who saw beauty in the broken pieces. Later, as evening fell and soft lights illuminated the garden, Alexander found himself standing with Sarah and Catherine, watching as Eleanor dozed peacefully in her favorite garden chair. "You know," Catherine said thoughtfully, "Grandma told me something interesting yesterday. During one of her clear moments, she said, 'The heart of this house isn't in the walls or the wealth. It's in the people who choose to stay when staying is hardest.'" Alexander looked at Sarah, who had remained steadfast through it all. "She's right, as usual." Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting the gentle garden lights. "Your mother has always understood what truly matters. Even now when her mind wanders, her heart remains perfectly oriented. As if sensing she was being discussed, Eleanor opened her eyes and looked directly at them. For a moment, perfect lucidity shone in her gaze. "The three of you," she said clearly, "are the future of this house. Promise me you'll fill it with more love than business, more laughter than ambition." "We promise, Mother," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. Eleanor nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes again. The three of them remained, standing together as guardians of both her present dignity and her lasting legacy. In the mansion that had once been a monument to success and appearance, new foundations were being laid, invisible ones built of compassion, presence, and authentic connection. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers remained, but they no longer defined the home's worth. That value now resided in moments of recognition, in patience through confusion, in the courage to choose love over convenience. And for Alexander Blackwood, who had spent decades building an empire of steel and glass, the most valuable discovery was this: true wealth was never about what you possessed, but about who remained by your side when everything else fell away, and about becoming the kind of person worthy of that steadfast presence. As autumn leaves began to fall around the estate, he knew with certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, for his mother, for himself, for this unconventional family they were building, they would face them together, with the strength that comes not from power or position, but from hearts that had learned to see beyond surfaces to the authentic core beneath. Dear listeners, we hope Alexander's journey of rediscovery has touched your hearts. Sometimes life's greatest lessons come when we're forced to reevaluate what truly matters. If this story of family, dignity, and authentic connection resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys that explore the depth of human experience. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up for what's right when it wasn't convenient? Did this story remind you of someone special in your own life? We've prepared a special playlist of similarly moving stories about family bonds that transcend conventional boundaries. You'll find it linked to the left. Until our next story, remember that true wealth is measured not in possessions, but in the hearts that choose to remain when staying is hardest.